Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss these amazing royal stories. Now, let's dive into a secret that has been hidden for 40 years. The rain hammered against the windows of the small cottage in the English countryside. Michael Thompson sat in his worn leather chair, staring at the television screen. The news anchor was talking about Princess Diana again, showing old footage from her wedding day. Michael's hands trembled as he gripped the armrests. For 40 years, he had kept a secret locked deep inside his heart. A secret that had haunted him every single day since July 1981. Michael was now 72 years old, retired from the Royal Guard for nearly 2 decades. His uniform hung in the closet upstairs, perfectly pressed, a reminder of the life he once lived. The medals pinned to his chest told stories of dedication and service, but there was one story those medals could never tell. One night that changed everything he thought he knew about duty, honor, and the royal family. His granddaughter, Emma, visited him that rainy afternoon. She was a journalism student, always curious about his time at the palace. She had asked him countless times about the royals, about Princess Diana, about the secrets behind those massive palace walls. Every time Michael had smiled politely and changed the subject. But today felt different. Today, as he watched Diana's face on the screen, something inside him finally broke. Emma noticed the tears in her grandfather's eyes. She had never seen him cry before. The strong, stoic man who had served the Queen with unwavering loyalty was crying while watching a wedding that happened before Emma was even born. She sat down beside him, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. Michael turned to look at his granddaughter. Her kind eyes reminded him so much of his late wife, Margaret. Margaret had been the only person who knew parts of the story, and she had taken those parts to her grave 3 years ago. Before she died, Margaret had held Michael's hand and whispered something that had been echoing in his mind ever since. She had told him that some truths deserve to be known, that silence can be just as harmful as speaking out. He took a deep breath and asked Emma to turn off the television. The room fell silent, except for the rain pattering against the roof. Michael stood up slowly, his old knees protesting, and walked to the window. He looked out at the gray sky, gathering his thoughts, organizing memories that he had tried so hard to bury. Emma waited patiently. She knew her grandfather well enough to understand that he was preparing to tell her something important. She pulled out her phone, not to record, but to take notes. Whatever he was about to say, she wanted to remember every word. Michael began to speak, his voice quiet but steady. He told Emma about July 28, 1981, the night before the royal wedding. He had been assigned to the night shift at Clarence House, where Lady Diana Spencer was staying before her marriage to Prince Charles. It was supposed to be a routine assignment. Stand guard, ensure security, and maintain the strict protocol that governed every aspect of royal life. The palace was buzzing with activity, even at night. Florists were making final adjustments. Security personnel were running last-minute checks, and staff members were rushing around ensuring everything would be perfect for the morning ceremony. Michael had been stationed in a corridor on the 2nd floor, near the private quarters. It was a quiet post away from the chaos below. Around midnight, he heard footsteps. Light, hesitant footsteps that seemed to pause every few seconds. Michael straightened his posture, his hand instinctively moving closer to his side. In his training, they had learned to identify different types of footsteps. These were not the confident strides of staff members who knew exactly where they were going. These were the steps of someone uncertain, perhaps lost, or perhaps trying not to be heard. A figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the corridor. It was Lady Diana, still awake at this late hour, wearing a simple nightgown and a robe. Her face was pale, and even in the dim lighting, Michael could see that her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying. She stopped when she saw him, clearly startled by his presence. Michael immediately stood at attention, as protocol demanded. He was not supposed to speak unless spoken to. He was not supposed to acknowledge what he saw unless it posed a security threat. He was a guard, a silent observer, a protector who existed in the background of royal life. But something about the way Diana looked at him that night made all his training seem suddenly inadequate. She did not walk past him as he expected. Instead, she stopped a few feet away and simply stood there, staring at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear, sadness, and desperate loneliness. Michael had seen many things during his years of service, but he had never seen a bride look so utterly terrified on the night before her wedding. This was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, yet she looked like someone walking toward their doom. Emma listened intently, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. She did not interrupt, sensing that her grandfather needed to tell this story at his own pace. Michael continued, his voice growing softer as he relived that night in his memory. Diana stood in the corridor, looking at Michael with those haunted eyes. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then, breaking every rule of royal protocol, Diana spoke to him. Her voice was barely above a whisper, shaky and fragile, like glass about to shatter. She asked him if he had ever made a terrible mistake. She asked him if he had ever felt trapped by a decision that everyone else celebrated. Michael was trained to remain silent, to not engage in conversation, to certainly not discuss personal matters with members of the royal family. But something in her voice made him abandon those rules. He was not looking at Lady Diana Spencer, the future Princess of Wales. He was looking at a 9-year-old girl who was clearly drowning in fear. Michael broke protocol. He spoke to her gently, telling her that everyone has doubts, that feeling nervous before a big life change was natural. He tried to reassure her the way he would reassure his own daughter. But Diana shook her head slowly. She told him this was not just nervousness. She told him she had discovered something that changed everything. She told him she knew about Camilla. The name hung in the air between them like a dark cloud. Even in 1981, even before the wedding had taken place, Diana already knew about Prince Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. She had found a bracelet that Charles had commissioned for Camilla, a gift with their intimate nicknames engraved on it. She had seen the way Charles looked when he spoke about Camilla. She had felt the coldness in his eyes when he looked at her. Michael felt his heart sink. He knew, of course. Many people within the palace knew about Charles and Camilla. It was an open secret among staff, whispered about in quiet corners, but never acknowledged openly. The royal family had chosen Diana to be the perfect princess, the perfect mother to future heirs, the perfect public image. Whether Charles loved her or not seemed irrelevant to those who had arranged this union. Diana began to cry, silent tears streaming down her young face. She told Michael she had tried to call off the wedding. She had gone to her sisters, to her family, explaining that she could not marry a man who was in love with someone else. But they had told her it was too late. The invitations had been sent. The world was watching. The preparations were complete. Her face was already on commemorative plates and tea towels across the nation. Backing out now would be a scandal beyond imagination. She told Michael that her sister had said something that broke her heart. Her sister had told her that her face was already on the tea towels, so it was too late to back out. That single sentence had crushed any hope Diana had of escaping. She was not a person anymore. She was a commodity, a symbol, a piece of merchandise that had already been sold to the public. Michael stood there, listening to this young woman pour out her heart to a stranger in a palace corridor at midnight. He wanted to tell her to run, to leave, to save herself from a life of misery. But he also knew the reality. There was no escape for her now. The machinery of the monarchy had been set in motion, and Diana was caught in its gears. She asked him a question that would haunt Michael for the next 40 years. She looked directly into his eyes and asked him if he thought she should go through with it. She asked a royal guard, a man whose job was to protect the physical safety of the royals, whether she should marry Prince. Charles, knowing that he loved another woman, Michael's training had not prepared him for this moment. There was no protocol for answering such a question. He could lose his job just for having this conversation. He could be dismissed from service for giving advice to a member of the royal family about such a personal matter. But as he looked at Diana's tear-stained face, he realized that his answer would matter. Whatever he said in this moment would stay with her forever. He chose his words carefully. He told Diana that he could not tell her what to do, that such a decision was far beyond his place or understanding. But he also told her that she seemed like a kind and strong person, that whatever path she chose, she would find a way to make something good from it. He told her that sometimes life puts us in impossible situations, but that does not mean we are powerless." Diana listened to his words, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her robe. She thanked him for his kindness, for treating her like a human being rather than just a royal figure. She told him that no one else in the palace had shown her such simple compassion. Everyone else was too busy with preparations, too focused on the spectacle of the wedding, too invested in the fairy tale to notice that the bride was falling apart. Then Diana said something that Michael would never forget. She told him that she would go through with the wedding, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She said she would try to make the best of it, try to find happiness where she could, try to be the princess everyone expected her to be. But she also made him promise something. She asked him to remember this conversation, to remember that she had known the truth from the beginning, to remember that she was not naive or foolish. If anything ever happened to her, if the world ever wondered whether she had known what she was getting into, she wanted at least one person to know that she had entered this marriage with her eyes wide open, Michael promised. He gave her his word as a guard, as a soldier, as a man of honor. He would remember. He would carry her truth with him, even if he could never speak it aloud. Diana smiled sadly, thanked him again, and walked back down the corridor toward her room. Michael watched her go, her small figure disappearing into the shadows, and he felt a profound sense of dread about what the future held for this young woman. The next morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and celebration. Michael stood among the other guards lining the route to St. Paul's Cathedral. Thousands of people filled the streets, waving flags and cheering. The entire world seemed to be watching this fairy tale wedding. Television cameras from dozens of countries broadcast every moment to millions of viewers. It was meant to be the happiest day in recent royal history. Michael saw Diana arrive in the glass coach, her enormous wedding dress barely fitting through the carriage door. The crowd erupted in cheers. She smiled and waved, looking every bit the radiant bride that everyone expected to see. But Michael could see something that the cameras could not capture. He could see the slight tremor in her hand as she waved. He could see the forced quality of her smile. He could see the fear behind her eyes. As she passed by his position, their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, Michael saw a silent plea in her gaze, a desperate look that seemed to ask for help that he could not provide. Then she was gone, swept forward by the tide of ceremony and tradition. Moving toward a destiny that she had tried and failed to escape, Michael stood at attention throughout the ceremony, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying their conversation from the night before. He kept thinking about the young woman who had been told her face was already on the tea towels, so she had no choice but to proceed. He wondered how many other people involved in this grand spectacle knew the truth. How many knew that this was not a love match but a carefully arranged union designed to produce heirs and maintain appearances? The years that followed proved Diana's fears to be justified. Michael continued his service in the Royal Guard, often assigned to duties that brought him into proximity with the Princess of Wales. He watched as she threw herself into her royal duties, becoming the most photographed and beloved woman in the world. He saw her genuine warmth with people, her natural ability to connect with those who were suffering, her grace under the constant scrutiny of the public eye, but he also witnessed the private pain. He was present during official events where the tension between Charles and Diana was obvious to anyone paying attention. He saw the way Charles would avoid even looking at his wife, the way Diana's smile would fade the moment the cameras turned away. He heard the rumors that circulated among palace staff about arguments, about Charles's continued relationship with Camilla, about Diana's growing unhappiness. There were moments when Michael caught Diana's eye during various royal functions. She never acknowledged their midnight conversation directly, but there was always a brief recognition in her glance, a subtle reminder that they shared a secret. It was as if she was checking to make sure he still remembered his promise, that he was still keeping her truth safe. Michael told his granddaughter Emma about one particular incident that occurred about 3 years after the wedding. He had been assigned to security detail during a royal visit to a hospital. Diana was there to open a new children's wing, and as always, she was magnificent with the sick children. She held their hands, listened to their stories, made them laugh despite their pain. The cameras captured every beautiful moment. But after the official visit ended, after the press had left and most of the staff had moved on to the next location, Diana remained. She asked if she could spend a bit more time with the children, away from the cameras. Most of the security detail went with the rest of the royal party. But Michael was asked to stay as her guard during this private time. Diana sat with a little girl who was terminally ill. The child was perhaps 6 years old, with no hair from chemotherapy and a tired, pale face. Diana held the girl's hand and talked to her softly. The little girl asked Diana if being a princess was as wonderful as it looked in fairy tales. Michael watched as Diana's composure cracked for just a moment. She was quiet for a long time before answering. Diana told the child that being a princess meant you could help a lot of people, and that part was wonderful. But she also said that fairy tales do not always tell the whole story. She said that sometimes real life is harder than the stories suggest. She told the little girl that what matters most is being true to yourself and being kind to others, whether you are a princess or not. After they left the hospital, Diana walked ahead of Michael toward the waiting car. She stopped suddenly and turned to face him. They were alone in the corridor for just a moment. She thanked him for being there that night before her wedding. She told him that his kindness had meant more to her than he could ever know. She said that in the years since, whenever she felt completely alone in the palace, she would remember that at least one person had seen her as a human being, rather than just a royal decoration. Michael felt tears in his eyes as he recounted this memory too. Emma, he told her that he had wanted to say so much more to Diana in that moment. He wanted to tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that her impact on the world was profound, that she was far more than the role she had been forced to play. But protocol held him back. He simply nodded respectfully, and Diana smiled sadly before getting into her car. The marriage deteriorated further over the years. The separation was announced in 1992. The divorce was finalized in 1996. Michael watched it all unfold with a heavy heart, knowing that this outcome had been inevitable from the very beginning. Diana had known it on that night in 1981 when she stood crying in the palace corridor. She had known that marrying Charles meant signing up for heartbreak. The official reports called it a tragic accident, caused by a drunk driver fleeing from paparazzi. The funeral was watched by billions around the world. Michael stood among the crowds outside Westminster Abbey, no longer in his guard uniform, just another mourner among millions. He watched as Diana's sons, William and Harry, walked behind their mother's coffin. He saw the same lost look in their young faces that he had seen in their mother's eyes all those years ago. In the days and weeks following Diana's death, Michael struggled with the promise he had made to her. She had asked him to remember their conversation, to remember that she had known the truth from the beginning. But what good did remembering do now that she was gone? What purpose did his silence serve? He talked about it with his wife Margaret. They sat together in their small kitchen, and Michael finally told her the full story of that midnight encounter. Margaret listened carefully, as she always did. When he finished, she asked him why he felt he needed to keep this secret. Diana had not sworn him to secrecy. She had only asked him to remember, to bear witness to her truth. But Michael felt bound by his years of service, by the code of discretion that governed all royal guards. You did not speak about what you saw or heard within palace walls. You did not reveal private conversations. You served in silence, and you carried those secrets to your grave. It was a matter of honor, of professional integrity. Margaret understood, but she also pointed out something important. She reminded Michael that Diana had been isolated within the royal family, that so much of her story had been twisted and controlled by others. Diana had been painted as unstable, as paranoid, as mentally unwell. Her claims about Charles and Camilla had been dismissed. Her unhappiness had been attributed to her own failings rather than to the impossible situation she had been placed in. Margaret suggested that maybe Diana's request for Michael to remember was not just about personal validation. Maybe it was about having a witness to the truth, someone who could confirm that her perceptions were accurate, that she had not been crazy or irrational. Maybe someday, when the time was right, the testimony would matter. Michael thought about this often in the years that followed. He watched as Charles eventually married Camilla exactly as Diana had feared would happen. He watched as the truth about their relationship, which had been denied for so many years, gradually became accepted public knowledge. He watched as Diana's sons grew into men. Carrying the weight of their mother's legacy, he retired from the royal guard with honor and commendations. He received letters of thanks from various members of the royal family for his years of dedicated service. He attended reunions with fellow guards, sharing stories and memories from their time in service. But he never told anyone about that night before the wedding. That secret remained locked inside him. Margaret died 3 years before that rainy afternoon when Michael finally decided to share his story with Emma before she passed. She had held his hand and told him that some truths deserved to be known. She said that Diana's story belonged to the world, and that his silence, while honorable, might be preventing people from understanding the full tragedy of what Diana had endured. Those words had stayed with Michael. He thought about them constantly in the years after Margaret's death. He watched documentaries about Diana, read books analyzing her life, listened to experts debate her mental state and her motivations. So much of what was said about her was wrong or incomplete. People who had never met her claimed to understand her better than she understood herself. And then, on that rainy afternoon, watching footage of Diana's wedding on television, something inside Michael finally broke. He realized that he was now 72 years old. He was the same age his own father had been when he died. He did not know how much time he had left, and the weight of carrying Diana's secret had become too heavy. Emma, his granddaughter, sat beside him with her notepad, waiting patiently as he gathered his thoughts. Michael looked at her and saw in her eyes the same kind of earnest compassion that Diana had shown to that sick little girl in the hospital. He saw the same desire to understand truth, to hear real stories, to connect with the human beings behind the public images. Michael made a decision. He would tell Emma everything. He would break his silence after 40 years. He would honor the promise he made to Diana by ensuring that at least one person in the younger generation knew the full truth about that night before the wedding. He would be the witness Diana had asked him to be. Emma promised him that she would handle this story responsibly, that she would not sensationalize it or use it to hurt anyone. She understood the weight of what her grandfather was sharing. She understood that this was not gossip or scandal, but a testimony to truth, a small piece of a much larger tragedy. Michael continued his story, telling Emma about the smaller moments he had witnessed over the years, the times he had seen Diana comfort staff members who were having difficult days, the way she had fought to change royal protocol so she could be more hands-on with her sons, the genuine joy on her face when she was doing charity work, connecting with people who were suffering. Michael told Emma about another incident that had stuck with him through the years. It happened during a royal tour of Australia in 1983. Diana was there with baby William, and the tour was meant to showcase the happy young royal family. Michael was part of the security detail accompanying them during one of the private moments between public appearances. Michael witnessed an argument between Charles and Diana. They were in a hotel suite, and Michael was stationed outside the door. The walls were thick, but voices carry when people are upset. He could hear Charles's irritated tone, though he could not make out most of the words. He heard Diana crying, pleading with Charles about something. When they emerged for their next public appearance, both were smiling. Charles had his hand on Diana's back in what looked like a loving gesture. Diana's makeup was perfect, covering any signs that she had been crying moments before. They waved to the crowds, played with baby William for the cameras, and looked like the picture-perfect royal couple. Only Michael and the other staff knew what had happened behind closed doors. This became a pattern that Michael observed repeatedly over the years. The public saw a fairy tale, or at least they saw it for the first few years. The staff saw the reality. They saw Diana's isolation, her struggles with bulimia, her desperate attempts to make her marriage work despite Charles's emotional absence. They saw her transformation from a shy young woman into a confident, powerful force for good in the world. Even as her personal life crumbled, Michael told Emma about the time he saw Diana visiting a hospice for AIDS patients in 1987. This was during a time when fear and misinformation about AIDS was widespread. Many people were terrified of any contact with AIDS patients. Diana walked in without gloves and shook hands with patients, held their hands, sat on their beds talking with them. Her simple act of human compassion helped change public perception about AIDS more than any public health campaign could have done. After that visit, Michael saw Diana sitting alone in the car before they drove away. She was not crying, but she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. When she noticed Michael watching, she smiled at him. That same sad smile he had seen on the night before her wedding. She told him that days like this made everything worthwhile. She said that if she could use her position to help people, to bring attention to causes that were ignored, to make even one person feel less alone, then perhaps there was a purpose to all of this. She gestured vaguely, and Michael understood she meant her entire situation. The loveless marriage, the constant scrutiny, the impossible expectations. Michael told Emma that he came to understand Diana as someone who transformed her pain into purpose. She could have become bitter and withdrawn. Instead, she became one of the most compassionate public figures in the world. She used her suffering to develop empathy for others who suffered. She turned her own isolation into a mission to reach out to those who were isolated by illness, poverty, or social stigma. But there were also moments when the facade cracked completely. Michael was present during one official event in the early 90s when Diana received news that a tabloid was about to publish embarrassing details about her private life. She had to maintain her composure and continue with the royal engagement, smiling and chatting with dignitaries. Even though she knew that her privacy was being violated once again, after the event, Michael saw her in a hallway, leaning against a wall with her eyes closed. She looked defeated in a way he had never seen before. He did not speak to her. Protocol would not allow it, but she seemed to sense his presence. Without opening her eyes, she said quietly that she did not know how much longer she could continue like this. She said she felt like she was living in a prison made of cameras and judgment. Michael had wanted to say something comforting, but before he could find words that would not violate protocol, another staff member appeared and Diana straightened up, put on her public face again, and moved on to her next obligation. That image of her, exhausted and defeated, leaning against that wall, stayed with Michael for years. He told Emma about the day the separation was announced in 1992. There was a sense of relief among some staff members who had watched Diana struggle for so long. At least now the pretense could end. At least now she would not have to pretend to be in a happy marriage. But there was also concern. Diana's position within the royal family had always been precarious, dependent on her role as Charles's wife. Without that, what protection did she have? Diana seemed both freed and frightened by the separation. Michael saw her during various events in the years that followed. She was doing some of her best work, taking on controversial causes like landmine removal, speaking out on issues that mattered to her. She seemed more authentically herself than she had been in years. But there was also a vulnerability about her, a sense that she was walking a tightrope without a safety net. Michael recounted the famous Panorama interview from 1995, where Diana spoke openly about her marriage, about Camilla, about her struggles. He had watched it at home with Margaret, and they had both been struck by Diana's honesty and courage. She was finally telling her own story in her own words, refusing to let others control the narrative about her life. But Michael also knew how much that interview cost her. The royal family was furious. The public was divided. Some saw her as brave and truthful. Others saw her as unstable and inappropriate. Diana had gambled everything on that interview, hoping that by telling the truth, she could finally be free. Instead, it seemed to make her situation even more precarious. The divorce came in 1996. Diana lost her HRH title. She was no longer officially a member of the royal family, though she remained the mother of the future king. Michael remembered thinking at the time that Diana had finally escaped the trap she had known she was walking into back in 1981. But it was a hollow victory, achieved at tremendous personal cost.